welcome to Unlapped. Why does it feel like I haven't seen you guys in forever? Like, it's been technically a week, but like, I feel like
time flies after the Miami race. Time just flies by.
Time is also a flat circle, so we lose all the time. Welcome to Unlapped. Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. It's Nicole, it's Nate, it's Lawrence. If you're watching on YouTube, remember, you know the drill. Always leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe. ESPN's new ESPN F1 channel is also where you can get F1 content all season long, which is actually unfair because honestly, you can get F1 content there like 365 days a week. Or if you're listening on some other platform, just hit us up with a 5-star review. We love you, we mean it, and we're here every week. I've missed you guys very much, and I'm so happy to see that you are home for the week before you travel on to the next location, which is great because now we get a triple header again. So it goes Imola, then it goes Monaco, and then we get Spain. So our producers obviously have questions for us after all of the shenanigans that we saw in Miami. And I think, honestly, the biggest one is, what is Zak Brown going to do? That man has some problems on his hands.
Good problems, though, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a team boss, it's the sort of good problem you want to have. I think that's kind of where the feeling is, isn't it, at McLaren now? You've got this championship season. I'd love to know what you both think about Max Verstappen in terms of how much pressure he can actually put over the course of a season. But while he's there and while he's close, this kind of idea of, you know, how much do we let these guys race? You can't let it go on too long. We know that in Spain, maybe there's some changes coming that, you know, maybe can pull McLaren back. So, yeah, I think it's a big talking point going into this weekend. And we know that, I mean, we still haven't really seen McLaren fully have to deal with a team order situation yet, have we? Like the papaya rule stuff last year. There's been a few things. There was, you know, Lando in China when he was ahead of Oscar, and it felt like that wasn't maybe handled as well. So I feel like one of these three races, we've got to get one of two things happen. Oscar and Lando collide in some way, just fighting for the same bit of racetrack, or McLaren having to kind of deal with the two guys being close together and saying, look, we actually, guys, that is the one thing we don't want you to do. Please don't race. And then the inevitable fallout of that. It feels like we're at a position now where that's going to happen. And then, how they deal with that, how Zak Brown deals with that. Your friend from the Miami feature, Nicole, which I want to give you a tip of the hat to as well, was fantastic. Yeah. Ahead of the Miami Grand Prix, how he'll deal with it. And I'm not sure, to be honest. I think he and Andrea Stella deal with these things very differently, don't they? They've got a very different approach. So I think that in itself is quite an interesting one as well in terms of that dynamic.
Like, Laz, is there any world in which, like, if you look at just what Oscar has done, like, you can come into the season with all the expectations for Lando and you can pin it all on him. But if you look at the way Oscar has gone out there and just flat out won quite literally almost everything, like, how do you not support him as your number one?
I think they have to be careful because form does go up and down. And also Lando Norris at the moment, if you look at what happened in Miami, he was actually probably the faster of the two drivers. He just messed up in the first corner. Or didn't really even mess up, just got hung out in the wrong place at the first corner, then fell back. And then he didn't quite have the pace to ever catch up with Oscar and make happen. So you have to be a little bit careful because if Oscar has a series of, you know, some bad luck or whatever, and Max is still in the fight, and at certain stages you haven't allowed Lando to collect points, then you do have issues. I think it's way too early to start talking about any kind of team orders within the team at this stage. They actually had some at the very first race in Australia, if you remember, where Oscar was catching up on Lando and they didn't want them to pass because it was wet off the racing line and they were worried that they might get caught in an accident and they were coming up against back markers. I think there'll be bits and pieces like that, but genuine, we're going to support one driver over another, you know, old-fashioned Ferrari, Michael Schumacher, Rubens Barrichello team orders. I don't think we're going to see them until much later in the year. And even then, only if Max Verstappen is still in the championship equation, or George Russell, or if anybody else can drag themselves into it. But otherwise, I think they'll let them race. And I think they should, because, you know, we talked about so many times before, the opportunity here that is presenting itself to both these drivers, both going for their first world championship, and with no guarantee that it's going to happen, you know, every year down the line. So I'd be very surprised if we see too much intervention straight away. Individual little moments in races, yes, but then again, McLaren have kind of already set their stall out with that, with Australia and as Nate mentioned, China, which we never saw that fully unfold because Lando had the brake issue and therefore couldn't attack Oscar. But That would have been an interesting one to see how it played out. But at the moment, Oscar's doing everything right, picking up the pieces, winning races, and Lando keeps making problems for himself. So if it's like that, then McLaren don't really have a problem anyway.
No, I just feel like you have to be so careful with team orders in those conversations, because think about what happened in Miami with, I think Ferrari obviously was the most like obvious one, with the drama there with let me around, I'm the faster car, and then they took forever and they needed their tea break to make their decisions. But then also Williams had the issue where the communication on the radio maybe wasn't as clear, and Sainz attacked, and Albon attacked, and Sainz wasn't prepared for that. And then they thought there was, there's such a fine line between making the right call in the appropriate time, and then also letting them race, because at the end of the day, that is what they're meant to do. That is what you bought them. Like you're paying them to do. So like, I just don't know how you strike that delicate balance, whether you're going for the world championship or you're just out there trying to get a win, or you're fighting for sixth.
Well, we were actually at Williams today, Nate and I, and we got a chance to have a few moments in a big group session with James Vowles. One of the questions that was put forward to him was about the team order situation in Miami. And he said, it really was a case that the order, there wasn't the clarity there. It hadn't been decided enough in advance. And basically, no one really did anything wrong. No one was trying to screw the other side over. It was just that they ended up in a situation, and the way that they'd structured their information to go from engineers to drivers wasn't as clear as it should be. And they've already made changes to make sure that won't happen in the future. And apparently this was explained to Carlos. Carlos was one who was particularly annoyed about it after the race, because he got passed by Alex. And Carlos basically took 5 minutes, said, okay, I understand it now. Let's move on. So I think the drivers are reasonable about this kind of thing as well. But to bring it back to McLaren, yeah, you just have to have a set way of dealing with situations that are likely to arise. Have that discussed before the race, have everyone know exactly where they stand, so that if something does happen in the race whereby a driver ignores a team order or goes against the team order and still attacks their teammate, you then have the pre-race agreement that you can point back to as Andrea Stella or Zak Brown and say, look, this is what we told you and you disobeyed it. And that was an interesting one for Mercedes of all these years with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. And of course, James Vowles was very much involved in the strategy of all of that and how it came together when he was the Mercedes strategy director. And so, I think you need a wise head and some very clear instructions early on. But it's amazing how it happens all the time in race teams. It just does, having two drivers competing against each other, but supposedly on the same team, you do set yourself up for these kind of issues all the time.
It's funny. I talked to Lando in Miami, and I said to him, I was like, look, like, how do you, because I think it was in Miami when Zak Brown came out and he was like, look, it's inevitable that they're going to have some sort of on-track issue at some point. Like the idea of them racing each other constantly and fighting for a world championship and then not having some sort of on-track run-in at some point is just an unrealistic expectation. It feels inevitable. So I remember I asked Lando, like, how do you want the team to handle this? And Lando told me, he was like, you can't ask me, because I've never been in this situation before. And so I don't have any experience, but Zak does. And Andrea does. He's like, so it's in a moment like this where I need to take a step back and let them handle it, even if they're going to handle it in a different way, or even if they're going to handle it in a way that maybe I don't understand. They've at least been there, done that before. And I'm going to default to them, which I actually thought was like, because you could come out and be like, well, they need to support me, obviously. And selfishly, like you would think that that's how any driver would go about that. But I actually thought it was a really mature approach to it, where he was like, they actually know what they're doing. And I'm going to default to them and I'm going to listen to them, because at the end of the day, they really do have our best interest in mind as a team. And they're really not trying to tank either one of us.
Yeah. Interesting. Lando's there at that point now. If you think about Hungary last year, when he spent most of the race kind of in a back and forth with Will Joseph, you remember that, Nicole, when he'd got ahead of Piastri because of the way they'd had to kind of implement both their strategies. So I do think that was quite a learning experience for Lando, because he spent a lot of the race saying, I don't want to give this win back up to Oscar. And it was made very clear to him, it's like, if you don't give this win back up, there will be ramifications. It will hurt your standing within the team. And I still do think that the clumsy handling of that did leave a bit of a sour taste in Piastri's, when he looked back at that. And certainly, like, it's been referenced, that was something that kind of maybe overshadowed his first win. So I think that it's interesting to hear Lando say that now. And I think that it's actually probably a good thing for him that he had that Hungary experience before he came into this season, because the last thing you want is for that to be unfolding in the middle of this kind of very, very tense intra-team battle with Piastri. But yeah, interesting to hear that. And I think, as you know, Nicole, Lando gives quite long answers now, and sometimes I feel like he kind of answers himself into a corner sometimes. He almost over answers questions, but that one, it seems like he gave quite a smart and reasonable one.
No,
I wonder if he will give the same answer though after the inevitable first. Because it's all well and good saying that in an interview on a Thursday before a race early in the season when you're cool, calm and collected, but in a race, we've seen it so many times where drivers just believe they're in the right because they have to, because there's no other way of operating in a Formula One car than to believe that, that you're doing the right thing. Okay, occasionally drivers make big errors and they admit it. But I mean, I'm just thinking as an example, Max Verstappen at Saudi Arabia, he left that car convinced that he had not taken an advantage by cutting the corner. He clearly had, but that is part of that mentality. So especially when it's in the heat of the kind of 10 minutes or 15 minutes, the interviews after a race, when a driver is asked about a situation like that, they are bottled up. They don't fully understand it. And to go back to that Williams example as well, where Sainz apparently, after being sat in a room with Alex and James Vowles for about 10 minutes, fully understood how it had all come about, then could get on board with it. But if that costs you, that's fighting for points in a Williams, which is impressive, but it's not a championship. When you're fighting for a championship, those things just get amplified so many times over, though. I'm not saying he won't argue that answer in the same way, but it'll be interesting to see if that is the case when it comes.
It's an interesting situation, though, because in a lot of ways, it is all relative. Like Ferrari was fighting they were trying to get sixth when the fallout happened between Lewis and Leclerc, and I'm the faster car, and let me around him. And at the end of the day, there are frustrations there because Lewis and Leclerc are we shouldn't be fighting for sixth. We should be fighting for the win. We should be fighting for the championship. And then Williams, they're in the situation where they've been pretty awful. The last, solid handful of years. So for them to be fighting for double points, it is all relative. And so the stress level is kind of there. It's just for different reasons. I don't even know how to ask this next question without actually saying the WTF, because
that's the best way to ask it. I think that is literally the best. That's what I was asking myself when this came through. If it's the one,
are you talking about Alpine?
Yeah. Is that what yeah. Okay.
First of all, Alpine in general, I feel like they make some really interesting decisions. There are some really interesting business dealings.
Look who's leading the championship right now. Former Alpine junior driver.
Oh my God, I didn't even. How come I didn't even think of that? Oh yeah, remember when he was I know that Alpine put out the statement earlier today saying I was driving for them. I'm absolutely not driving for them. They're just Alpine from an outsider's perspective. It's hard to look at them and not be what the F is going on? Literally from the Ali Oaks resignation to the perhaps not unexpected Franco Colapinto and Jack Doohan move. But if you just look at the week that they had, what WTF?
Yeah, that kind of is, if you were to write a book about that team, that's kind of one of the titles that you'd probably throw around. You'd say that is kind of, they're the one team that consistently is, there's instability there. It's chaotic. Even if you go back as far as when Daniel Ricciardo joined in 2019, I've spoken to Ricciardo about that, and he expected to walk into, a factory operation, very, very, much like Red Bull. And what he found was this kind of place that was all over, operation that was all over the place, management moving, chopping and changing. And really, things haven't changed since then. But to answer your point specifically, Nicole, the week they had, I was in Chicago when that Ollie Oaks news broke, and I kind of was walking and I read it, and I had to kind of double read the email that we got, because it said, Ollie Oaks will resign as boss of Alpine. We knew that this Franco Colapinto news was coming around the same time as well. So it was very easy to kind of draw a link between the two things. Ollie Oaks had there's a great picture that Scott Mitchell-Marm from the race tweeted, that the Netflix cameras actually were kind of chasing Ollie Oaks as he left the paddock on Sunday. He kind of cancelled his media session with the written media, which would have been us, and kind of ran where Alpine's hospitality unit is. You remember, it was that one right in the corner. So he ran down that little alleyway and out of the stadium. Now, a lot of us were like, okay, well, that does happen sometimes. Team bosses do have to change flights and stuff like that. But as it has emerged in the days since then, there's probably a bit more to that, because he Lawrence and I actually spent a long time talking about this when the Ollie Oaks resignation came through.
Okay.
We thought this has got to be linked to the Colapinto Jack Doohan situation. Maybe it's an erosion of his authority. We always got the impression that while Oaks was kind of supportive of Doohan, he was kind of between a rock and a hard place because he couldn't really say Colapinto wasn't coming in. He also couldn't really talk too much about Doohan. Doohan wasn't doing so well. But you wondered, okay, maybe this fact that Colapinto is now coming in was too much for him, and he was like, I can't stomach this anymore. I think we were being very kind to Ollie Oaks potentially, but I mean, what seems to have happened is his brother's been caught up in some legal stuff. He has now gone to Dubai. We don't know whether the two things are connected, but it's an awful coincidence if that is the case. And yeah, so from what we've heard, he's gone to Dubai, and I reached out to the team today if they know his whereabouts at the moment, and they said the last we knew he was in Dubai. They haven't been keeping tabs of him. They did point out that he is no longer an employee of the team, so it's not on us to know that, which is fair. But yeah, a really wild week, and then to top all of that off,
they're still there.
Yeah, what I mean, again, we have to be very careful about talking about this because it's his brother who's been implicated in, I think it's transferring of illegal property, but it's with a company that Ollie Oaks as well has been, co-founded with his brother, has been linked with for a long, long time. But to top all of that week off as well, and I think this is the bit that really does add it goes from chaotic and wild to just downright Formula One craziness, is that in all of that now, when Lawrence goes to Imola on Thursday, the team boss of the Alpine team will be Flavio Briatore, who obviously himself is a massively controversial figure, once banned for life from the sport, now back. So that's a good way for me to throw it over to Lawrence. But yeah, in terms of weeks of Formula One, I think weirdly in that the Colapinto promotion was actually kind of the least shocking of all three of those things, because we kind of knew it was coming. We didn't know when. It was, okay, maybe it was summer break, maybe it would be a bit later. If you'd said last week, right, Colapinto's going to be in the car in Imola, Ollie Oaks won't be there, Briatore will be leading the team, you would forget the Colapinto thing. You'd say, okay, what was those other two bits? So really, really shocking how that's turned around. And the future of that team now, really difficult to kind of to forecast because it's unprecedented. We don't really know what this situation, where it leads to.
And the other thing with that team is, if there was one team that needed something in particular, it was Alpine needing stability. They've had so many changes to team management, from Bruno Famin, the last team principal, who left around the time that they decided to end their production of power units from the start of next year, to Otmar Zafnauer before that. Matt Harmon, technical director's gone around the same time as Zafnauer. After Zafnauer, Alan Permain went around the same time as Zafnauer. He was a long-time sporting director. So many big names from the management of that team have left. And it's a shame, really, because in theory, it's a team that, okay, it's not on the level of Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, but, a few years ago, it probably wasn't a million miles actually away from McLaren. And if you look at how McLaren's developed with stability, Zak Brown calling the shots as the CEO at the top, making sure that the money's coming through the door to invest in the team. Andrea Stella then calling the shots very much on the team, getting everything organised, the right people in the right place, bringing in technical names like Rob Marshall from Red Bull. That is how you create a winning team, even with a customer engine deal, which is what McLaren have from Mercedes. They were still able to create something by basically creating that bedrock of stability in the management, but making sure it's the right people calling the right shots, bringing the right people in. And Alpine is just the complete opposite, to the point that, I've no idea where that team's going to be in 1-2 years, whether it's still going to be called Alpine, whether Flavio Briatore, who I think is 75 years old, is still going to be leading the team. Actually, Briatore, I think in some ways it's kind of what they need, someone who's going to make decisive decisions. I'm not a huge fan of his, and he's somebody that is very controversial within the sport, but he does have a reputation for getting things done. So I think, potentially he is the right guy to start to really put things in the right place. What's more, Briatore is probably doing that already. I mean, Oaks was very much running the race team, weekend to weekend, and Briatore's remit was much wider than that. Driver contracts and dealing with the politics of Formula One, all the things that actually Briatore is an expert at. He was already doing. I guess now he's going to have to find other people to put in the right places to make sure that the team runs race weekend to race weekend. But yeah, just the instability there, and then throw into the mix as well. I mean, as Nate said, the least biggest surprise of Alpine's last week, but throw into the mix as well a new driver who's done 9 races for Williams. We think is pretty good, but also crashed quite a lot. And by the way, he's only got 5 races apparently to get to prove that he is the guy to stay in. So it's a huge pressure on Franco Colapinto as well. We knew there was this pressure on doing from the start of the year. We felt that was a little bit unfair. Well, they kind of just roll Colapinto into the same situation. But I mean, there's more of a deadline there. So at least he knows what he's playing with, whereas doing it always felt weekend to weekend. We weren't sure what the deal was. But yeah, that's tough. And it's tough on the team and it's tough on Franco. But I guess this is Formula One and it's probably not meant to be easy.
It's very Briatore, isn't it? 5 races.
Well, okay, so that's the thing. It is very Briatore from we have an extra guest on the podcast. This is Leonard.
Very welcome.
He's becoming a regular. He's
like, I love me. It does feel a little bit like if I'm Colapinto's manager, if I'm Doohan's manager, it's just an interesting situation because of who their managers are. I'm not signing that contract. Like, I'm not putting myself in a position where I'm given 5 races to quote unquote prove myself. But that also speaks to the nature of like Formula One. And it speaks to like the what have you done for me lately situation. But like, I'm not signing that contract. Like 5 races can be a parts failure. You could be collected in turn 1. You don't know how good the car is. Like, you can't hardly do anything in 5 races. So it's like you look at Doohan, and there were some mistakes that he made, but then there were also some mistakes that like the team made. The team put him in a bad position. Yep. Why am I to believe that it's going to be any different or any better for Colapinto? And why would those 5 races suddenly be like, well, here we go?
It doesn't sound like Briatore has, unless he sees Colapinto as a longer term pick for Alpine. And I think it's been quite clear that Williams don't want to let him go too easily. He's obviously there on loan from Williams. Yeah. Again, to go back to the Piastri example of a former Alpine driver leading the championship, Alpine have never really been that smart with the way they've pushed their young talent through the ranks. And now what you've got, you're absolutely right, Nicole, you've got this weird situation where Doohan's sat there now as a reserve again. Will he come back in or not? I don't know. If he does, what state is his confidence going to be in? I don't think it'll be very good. And you've got Colapinto. And I think that it's a win-win for Colapinto in a weird way, because he can go there. If he's fantastic, he'll probably keep the seat for the rest of the year, you would assume. At the end of the season, do Williams then loan him again to Alpine? But this is the other thing Colapinto's got going for him. There's not a huge amount of options available, both to Alpine, but also to himself, which is why I would say I would have taken the contract if I was him, because there's no other way he's going to race this season. Unless, something happens to one of the Williams drivers. Obviously, you don't want that to happen. There's no way he's going to get into the car on a consistent basis. At Williams, and race. So I think that it is a chance for him to prove himself. The difference that this is that Briatore is effectively giving a Williams driver a chance of race experience, which is the one thing I don't understand, unless the short-term gain of the sponsors or the longer-term prospect of maybe being able to sign him is something that Briatore believes in. You have to assume with somebody like Briatore, he does think that there is a longer-term play with Colapinto, and I think the 5 races, I wonder how much that is just giving them that out in case, to your point, Nicole, there is a load of those problems. Or to Lawrence's point, the crashes we saw from Colapinto end up being more common this year than last year. It's just giving them that out. But of course, if they take that out, what happens? They go back to Doohan, and they've effectively already killed Doohan's career, in my opinion. So it's weird management, and it's very much it's like the whack-a-mole game. You hit one, and then another one pops up, and you keep striking the one that's popped up in front of you, and you're not solving the greater problem. And I think that's the thing with Alpine. It's consistently been that. There's never been this longer-term plan, and so I don't know. I'm actually very excited to see Colapinto. I think if you gave me the choice as a team boss between the two, I would first of all say, why am I team boss of a F1 team? You've made a terrible decision. Then
That's
secondly, I would say I would prefer to see Colapinto in there. Just we saw glimpses from him last year of real excitement. So from that sense, very exciting. But from a team management perspective, completely baffling and lots of question marks that I don't think we have had a really good answer to yet from.
Okay, so let me ask this question then. Doohan's out, and for a variety of reasons, it does feel like they have just bashed his career. What is the threshold for success then for Colapinto? Like, how does he prove himself? And maybe you don't even have an idea, but like, how does Colapinto prove himself to be the better option? Or is it just because they've already killed Colapinto's career that by nature, Doohan's career, that Colapinto is like the guy?
I mean, the great thing, if you are running a Formula One team, Nate, for the future, take notes, is that you have masses of data, huge amounts of data. So you can actually get into micro detail of where one driver is better than the other or not better than the other. Of course, the big answer is not crash, not make those mistakes that we were just talking about. But then I think, more subtly as well, with Jack Doohan, I figured out like-for-like qualifying sessions against Pierre Gasly, that on average, he was about 0.3 something seconds off Gasly in those first 6 races, including the sprint qualifyings. And then it was in Miami that he actually first out-qualified Gasly in a Grand Prix qualifying session. And so I actually felt, because he'd done that in Miami, because he'd finally shown that he could out-qualify Gasly in a qualifying session, that was the kind of progress that you would expect would perhaps give you another chance in the seat. But then, turn 1 didn't go as it should, and he kind of ploughed into the side of Liam Lawson. And I think that was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, and that was what saw the driver change happen now. But I mean, perhaps it was always likely to happen at this stage as well. I mean, there were sponsors of Colapinto saying that on a hot mic that it was going to happen in Imola anyway. So perhaps I'm being a bit naive there, but that's your data. Basically, where are you in qualifying against Pierre Gasly, who's clearly very good? Then you can go into the micro data of, where's he lacking? Is it just in high-speed corners? Is that a confidence issue? Do we feel like if we change the setup of the car, or we bring an improvement, will that extract the extra performance, and then would he be on Gasly's level? And then, the simple stuff like, do you score points? Do you take your opportunities? Do you crash? And I think in 5 races, you'll get a very limited sample of data there. You won't get the full picture, but perhaps if they get enough of a glimpse, they'll say, all right, another 5 races, and then Colapinto stays on, which, to be honest, I think might be the way it goes.
Okay. And let's not underestimate just quickly, Nicole, as well, the power of this first race as well, because last year I felt that Colapinto basically became this massive sensation on the basis of his first 2 races at Williams. For 2 reasons. One, we actually saw a guy that was kind of up there with what Alex Albon was doing, which obviously Logan Sargent hadn't been. So he benefited from he might not have even been doing that great a job, but he was doing such a better job than Sargent, and it stood out. And then he scored points. I think it was the second race, wasn't it, Lawrence, that he scored points for Williams last year?
I think so.
And so from that point, the star was set, the trajectory was there. And actually, when he did hit that lower point later in the year, I feel like he had credit in the bank already. So these couple races, I think if he can jump in the car and just be straight on it again. It doesn't have to be beating Gasly, like Lawrence said, but just straight in the car and looking like he belongs there, then I think it becomes an easy choice. Because the one thing I don't think you can say about Doohan is Doohan never felt like he was fully comfortable in the car, did he? He crashed out in Australia, had that crash in Japan. Just it seemed like he was under pressure, that Alpine had put him under a lot of that themselves. So if he can do that, I think the seat's his, beyond this triple header.
So the only other major thing I think that sort of like stood out this week was like the Cadillac situation, and some context here is there were a bunch of rumors in Miami about who was going to be there and what we might learn and what we might see. And we did get a glimpse. But Andretti came out this week, said, and this is a quote, the choice in terms of drivers, the choice is somewhat limited. Let's face it. A lot of the great talents are already under contract. Fortunately, still, there are a few out there, 3 or 4. I'll say maybe 3 that certainly deserve consideration in terms of who they want to bring into the team. Well, I mean, you get 3 drivers, there you go, sign them all. That's what you need. Who are they talking to? And at this point, like, why do you think we don't know who they are yet?
Well, there's still a bit to play out, because although there are lots of drivers under contracts for next year, some of those contracts are maybe not as stable as they seem. I mean, do we really know for certain that Max Verstappen's going to be in a Red Bull next year?
No.
And if he's not, then we have a game of musical chairs, and all of a sudden contracts start getting, broken and drivers move around. And then the situation could look very different. And Cadillac are in a position where, there are some very obvious contenders out there, likes of Sergio Perez, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, drivers that have experience, very recent experience in F1, have all proved themselves to be reasonably quick, probably everything that Cadillac needs in someone, like Perez or Bottas, because experience is going to be key early on. But why make that decision before you have to? Because it's very unlikely they're going to go elsewhere. I mean, I'm sure the management of, say Checo Perez will also be looking at Alpine as a possibility, with obviously their indecision over which driver to put in during this season, let alone next season. So, that's why I think there's still a little bit to play out. But if you're Cadillac, you've got you've probably got a fairly healthy budget to play with. You can keep drivers and you can just wait for things to play out, because there'd be nothing worse for them than they, sign 2 drivers up who they're just happy with, but, they're not 100% sure on. And those drivers are probably looking for 2-year or 3-year contracts, at least a 2+1. And then all of a sudden the driver market explodes with a bombshell piece of news. And they're like, well, we've got these 2 drivers now and we can't act on other ones. So I think that's probably why, we're still relatively early. These things tend to get done during the summer break. And that's usually the reason, because any question marks tend to fade away at that point when we start to know exactly where the big names are going to be for the following year.
So, okay, on that note, the fact that they are holding out, does that lend more credence to the questions around Max's contract and Max's desire to stay at Red Bull? The fact that there seems to be another shoe to drop and Cadillac is unwilling to commit, to me is like, where there's smoke, there's fire. And maybe there's more to it.
I think there's quite a high chance that they don't know either. I mean, I think probably no one really outside of Max's in camp, including Red Bull, have a full idea. But as long as that question mark's there, why act on, in a different way? Why? I mean, they're not going to get Max Verstappen. That's not what I'm suggesting. They're not like thinking, Max is going to be available.
No, but if Max goes somewhere else or Max's seat opens up, then there's a cascade of changes that happen.
Exactly. I was just kind of making clear that that's not what I was trying to say. But then the dominoes fall and then you have opportunities open. But no, I think, it's just that thing of they don't need to act yet. So why would you? Why would you sign someone? And I absolutely believe, and it seems quite clear, that they are talking to a number of drivers and they'll have basic, kind of ideas coming together and contracts come into place. But until you have to sign one, why sign it? And then also if you're a driver as well, if you're Checo Perez, and you're not that sure about the Cadillac project, is it going to give you what you want? You probably have a number in your head as well as to what you're going to get paid that is pretty high, and Cadillac might not want to meet. So Cadillac probably wants to, play it a little bit later. And the later you get with all of that, the more pressure gets put on those numbers, and either they go up or down, accordingly on what's happening in the rest of the market. But it's, it's the same as, any kind of situation like that. As long as there's time, it will usually get used, because there's no point in making decisions while there's still uncertainty out there.
All right, guys, it is time for the... No, what are you going to say? Fine, Nate, you can talk now.
Sorry. That was I've got nothing to dispute from Lawrence, so I could just shut my mouth. But I'm not going to. That wouldn't be fun. The one quick one I was going to add is our ESPN Mexico colleague, Josie Antonio, wrote some great stuff about Perez's situation. And he said exactly that. Perez, one name that wasn't mentioned there is obviously the big domino is George Russell's contract. Hasn't been signed yet. That is the one. If George signs with Mercedes, you assume everything else around stays the same. But if that kind of Jenga piece is pulled out, you can't predict it. And also, I think there's still a desire, isn't there, from Cadillac to maybe look at Colton Herta, and I'm not sure what his super license point situation is.
He has to finish so high. I think it's third in the IndyCar Series season, the championship, and then he would have enough points.
So I think that's happening on the same time. There's all of those factors that Lawrence mentioned, and then at the same time, you're like, well, we would like to get Herta in the car potentially if we can. Let's wait and see where he gets to, and then make a call later in the year. So I think they're pretty chilled about it. And that was all I was going to say. That was all I was going to say.
The only thing that's interesting in terms of timing for Colton Herta, in terms of like having enough points for the super license, the IndyCar season doesn't officially wrap up until 2 weeks after the break. So he might be sitting in a position in which he looks good to have enough points for the super license. But when the break happens and when a lot of those conversations are happening and things are getting worked out, he may still be technically up in the air depending on how close his point situation is.
I think
the other thing that struck me with Colton Herta as well is whether, and I haven't seen anything recently, but at the start of the season, whether he wanted to do it.
Right.
So he's like, well, do I want to go to F1 and Cadillac? But I mean, yeah, as long as there's a bit of interest there from both sides, another reason just to wait out, So it's not unheard of for contracts to be signed, after the end of the Formula One season for the following year. If you're the only team left with seats available, you have a lot of options, and usually a number of drivers who are very keen to fill it.
Okay, it is time for the stat of the week. Bum, bum, bum. It's brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. So guys, this will be the 32nd Grand Prix held at Imola. It's a very old school track. It first was on the F1 calendar the year that I was born. If you don't want to Google it, it was 1980. And then it dropped off again in 2007. And then it returned again during that COVID hit season in 2020. There's so much history at that particular track. I find the whole area around it to be incredibly charming as well. It's just like almost like a medieval village in some places. But the contract is expiring at 2025, at the end of 2025. So will this be the last time that we see Formula One cars on that track? Or is there hope for something more in the future?
I think so. I mean,
wait, you think so? What? Because I asked the question terribly, and now I don't know how you're answering it. Yes, there's a chance, or no?
Sorry. No, I don't think there's a chance that they'll come back. The only smidgen of hope I think they have is that one of the reasons they did come back is that Stefano Domenicali is actually from Imola, and it was a very, very convenient deal for them in COVID. It was something that was very easy for people to get to, has the history and the heritage, like you say. I'm the same as you, Nicole. I absolutely love Imola as a circuit, and the place around it is not too far from where my nonna is from. So my family's got ties just a bit north of that. But yeah, it's one of these circuits, isn't it? When you look at some of the new deals that are coming into Formula One, the money that they're able to throw into deals like that, Imola's just never going to be able to cope with that. Never going to be able to match that. And I think that there was an appreciation from Formula One teams and from fans about Imola coming on the calendar when Formula One was scrabbling around in 2020. But you look at the money. I mean, look at some of these deals that we've just been seeing. I mean, the Miami deal was what we were talking about in Miami. The length of that, the money that must be involved in that. Obviously, you have Vegas. You've got the Middle Eastern deals that are being stretched out. You've got Madrid. That's on the calendar for long term. You just can't see a venue like Imola having the money and the infrastructure to keep sustaining Formula One long term. So sadly, I think it will be the last time it races there. I might be wrong. There might be a time in future when there's been talk for a long time of maybe having alternating rounds that fill one slot a year. So you're one of 3 or 4 races that go on a loop. I would quite like that, actually. I think it would be quite nice just to have that bit of difference. But if you're putting Imola against the current kind of climate of Formula One deals, hard to see where they fit in, which is a real shame as well, because incredible history there. It's sadly, it's one of the circuits where you really see how big these cars have got compared to how they used to be, because it's obviously a circuit that you're used to seeing the smaller cars of the 80s and 90s on, and now you see these big, cumbersome cars going around, and it just, not that it takes away from it, but I think, it may be, maybe there's lost a little something there from a racing perspective. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Lawrence has a bit more optimism than me. But it was the one thing I was thinking. Usually we try and split these triple headers between us. So one of us will do one. We'll both then double up for another, and then the other one will do the third, just so we get more time at home. And I was really, especially when I thought maybe Ferrari would be quick this year, I was very, very tempted to join Lawrence in Imola for this one, because it is just such a great race. But it was one I'm giving up. So it'll be a shame to see it drop off for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. The other factor is Madrid, of course, coming in next year.
Oh, that's right. In the same
something
slot,
something has to fall off the calendar. because Barcelona weirdly still has an extra year on its contract. There was some speculation when Madrid first signed that Barcelona wouldn't see the final year of his contract, but with Imola's contract expiring this year, obviously it doesn't seem like there's any space for it next year anyway. So I think it is one of those circuits that perhaps, certainly as long as Stefano Domenicali is around, will be on the back burner as a potential circuit to fill in should a new circuit not be able to be ready on time or something like that. But given the change that we've seen in Formula One over recent years, I think it's very unlikely that we'll have 2 races in Italy over extended period of time going forward. Of course, we've still got Monza as the main Italian Grand Prix. We will have 2 Spanish Grand Prix as a weird quirk next year, but then Catalonia, Barcelona is unlikely to be renewed. And then, I think in Europe to have 2 races, in a single country is rare. I mean, the fact we don't have a German or a French Grand Prix at the moment tells you kind of a lot about how F1 feels about the necessity of having races in Europe when other places around the world are willing to spend more money, or there's markets such as the United States where having 3 races in such a big country makes a bit more sense. Mm-hmm. So, I think this is probably the last one we're going to have, which is, it's kind of sad. But I also agree with Nate's point that F1 cars have probably outgrown it a bit.
Yeah.
It's not a great track for racing in Formula One anymore. To be honest, it never really was that brilliant, even in the the early 2000s when I remember watching races there. It's very hard to overtake even then. So it's but it is a fantastic place to go.
I just like the trappings around it.
Yeah, exactly. And if anyone is gutted that they're missing their opportunity to go and they always wanted to go, I would recommend going to the Minardi Days, which is basically a celebration of old Italian Formula One cars, and then occasionally various other Formula One cars rock up. So you hear Ferrari V12s going down the pit straight again. So you'll still get a vibe of it. And I think that happens every spring as a kind of historic festival. So well worth going to visit, as you say, for the food and the hospitality in the area and the track itself, even if you don't get to see the final Grand Prix there.
Okay, so as long as we're on the track this weekend, so how like every week in the US, like I have to do these things at the beginning of the race, like, hi, I'm me. Thank you for watching. Our coverage brought to you exclusively by Mercedes-Benz. Join us next week. And so in Miami, I had to do the ones for Imola. And every race has like a sponsor.
Yeah. This one's always insane, isn't it?
They're always like very mouthy. It's not ever anything that just like rolls off the tongue. But most of the time, like I can get them out in like the first time, like, hey, this is the Formula One Grand Prix presented by Crypto.com or whatever. That's what it was in Miami. The race this weekend is the Formula One AWS Made in Italy Emilia Romagna Grand Prix.
Yeah.
It's like an absolute mouthful.
It's like they had the AWS Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, and someone was like, make it more Italian. So they're like, put made in Italy in there. Just
put some pasta. Put some pasta in there, just for whatever. Yeah. But anyway, it's sort of like the beginning. Well, it is the beginning of the European leg. It's also the beginning of like the next triple header. We didn't see a tremendous amount of upgrades brought to Miami because it didn't make any sense. It was a sprint race weekend, so you didn't have a lot of time. This is a weekend where sometimes we do, in terms of I start to see it, but then the track doesn't necessarily suit it. So what do we know? What do we expect from teams this coming week?
There's been rumors for a long time that Ferrari are targeting this race for a big upgrade. They certainly need one.
Yes.
Lewis Hamilton has said as much, but I think we can all agree that the Ferrari performance isn't where it needs to be. And basically since China, they've not been happy with how they can run the car. So there's meant to be some fixes coming for that. With these upgrades, teams are always very reluctant to say for certain they're coming in case, they kind of either put it on the car and they're not sure about it, or it's just literally not produced in time. But that's one we're fairly confident of. And I'd be surprised if there's any teams that don't have some small upgrade. They might not all come with huge, new floors and kind of real game changers, but I'd be surprised if they don't have something, because it is this kind of run of 3 races near the heartland of the Formula One teams. Now we're back in Europe. It's much easier to get the parts there. It's an obvious one for them to target. And the benefit, of course, if you get it on at the start of this triple header, then and it brings performance to the car, then you've got that across 3 races, 3 very different races. The only slightly weird thing this year is that Nate mentioned earlier, there's a change to the front wing load tests. So basically what you're allowed to do with the front wings and how flexible they can be. They're making the tests on those front wings much more stringent in Spain. And as a result, every team we're expecting is going to have to change their front wing in Spain, because there's no point in doing it before then, because you'll give away performance, because there is performance in having a flexing front wing. But knowing that all teams have been working towards that, perhaps there'll be a more comprehensive package that comes in Spain, because once you change the front wing, you're kind of changing everything that flows downwards a little bit from that point. So perhaps teams will target that one maybe. But I'd be surprised if there's not upgrades up and down the grid, which is always exciting for someone like me.
Yeah, James Vowles today said maybe not so much from the Williams side, but he did hint that, there would be something. So
isn't Spain where we're expecting stuff from them? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm making that up. It could be.
No. That's. I think that's what he said today as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Again, I think that's around the front wing. So maybe the smaller tems, you might see them delay a bigger package. But again, the amount of little just details that turn up on these cars weekend to weekend is impressive. There's fewer this year because 26 is the focus for a lot of teams. But yeah,
as long as we're nerding out about the cars at this moment, the floor upgrade or the floor changes that Red Bull made, we saw them in Miami. I don't know, is it enough? Because obviously the Mercedes, the McLarens kind of had no issue getting around him.
Yeah.
Is it going to be enough to close the gap? What parts will be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's not enough to comprehensively make Max Verstappen a genuine title challenger, because at the moment he's struggling with that. But over a single lap, of course, Max Verstappen was on pole position. So it's definitely brought a little bit, it's bringing the car back to where he wants it to be. I don't think it's still where he wants it to be, but considering how far away it was at the start of the year, it's bringing the car back that way. Now, the big difference there is the difference between qualifying, where the gaps are incredibly small still, and the race, and especially a race where there's big rear tyre degradation, because that is absolutely far and away McLaren's strength this year. There's a few questions about exactly how they're doing it, because some of their rivals can't believe that they've managed to find a way to make the car that much better on its rear tyres than everyone else. But that's the advantage that McLaren have. And interestingly, because this was something that came up in a number of post-race media sessions with team principals after Miami, Toto Wolff was saying, well, as much as we do need to focus on 26, we need to figure out what they're doing, with the rear suspension, or rear suspension geometry or whatever. There's lots of stuff that if you find the key to how they're looking after those rear tires now, it will still transfer through to 26, because it's not a massive aero thing. So that's an area that all teams will be looking to develop, I think, actually throughout this season. And because at the moment McLaren are far way ahead, and as long as you've got that kind of advantage, you're going to have a big advantage in the race.
So since you mentioned qualifying, one thing to bring up, I think, for this weekend is 5 of the last 12 at Imola have been won from pole, which you're like, okay, 5 of the last 12 isn't that tremendous, but it's actually 9 of the last 12 that have been won from the front row. So since you brought up qualifying, how important is qualifying this weekend? Is it another situation where basically the race is going to be won on Saturday?
Well, this year it's been pretty big, right?
Yeah.
Every single race has been, I know qualifying is always quite important, but it seems like this is a especially big year for qualifying. I mean, last year it was Max v Lando from the front row, wasn't it? I think Lando got pole, got beaten to turn 1 by Max, and that's what lost him the race. And that's the first time we really saw the McLaren able to kind of fight on a race-to-race basis. But yeah, I'm just trying to remember if there's been anyone win a race from lower than first row. And then I remember Miami, of course, Oscar did exactly that. So that obviously broke that trend up. But yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those circuits, and annoyingly, we've got 3 circuits where you feel like that is the case coming up now, isn't it? You've got Imola, Monaco obviously is famous for that, and Spain is another one where, if you get on pole, you can kind of just disappear into the distance.
So, okay. So on that note, then you can look at it, you're like, fine, the pressure really comes on Saturday, but is there any one team or any driver in particular that you're like, yeah, they are absolutely on the hot seat this weekend?
I'd say Ferrari is the most obvious one. Not only was the performance nowhere near where it should be in Miami, defending positions from Carlos Sainz at the end of the race, finishing behind Alex Albon. If you'd said to us at the start of the year, by the way, at certain circuits, the Williams is going to completely outperform the Ferrari, I think, we would have all been, well, we probably would have all laughed at it and said, no, there's no way it's going to happen. So the pressure is huge. And of course, the first home race for Ferrari this year, first Italian race for Lewis Hamilton since he joined. I think that all amplifies the pressure. So, yeah, I'm going to just go in there and say the easy one. Fred Vasseur and Ferrari are under pressure.
Especially what happened in Miami. They're going to have to be explaining all of that, straight from the start of the weekend. I would have said Ferrari, but I want to throw an honourable mention in there. I mean, we can always say Lando. I think he's on the hot seat until he gets another win. But I think if you go to further down, I mean, to be honest, you can put Alpine in there, but from a performance perspective, Aston Martin right now really on the hot seat. If you give them where they've been performance wise. I feel like these kind of upcoming races really will tell us a lot about where they are this season and whether they are going to be the team that just kind of says, right, we're shifting as much as we can over 20 to 26 because they just have not looked, they don't look like a team at the moment, do they? That you would think, right, that operation running that team is suddenly going to emerge as a championship contender next year. I'm not saying they're going to magically look like that in Imola, but I feel like we need to start seeing some turnaround from them, even if it's just fighting for points more regularly and getting a bit more out of Fernando Alonso. So I would say them as a second to Ferrari.
All right. I don't want to brag or anything, but I totally want to
brag. Go on, brag.
I want to brag. Our podium predictions, we have a new leader in the clubhouse. He stands alone.
I mean, honestly, that's a brag.
I had a double podium last week.
Yeah.
I think I pulled George from out of the where, but I went with Oscar with the win. I did have Max on the podium. That didn't happen. And I had George in third. But I scored 2 points. So now I lead the way with 6.
I got Lando and George the wrong way around, I believe. So it's close.
What's your name again?
I'm the guy in second, just trailing.
You had Oscar, George, and Lando. So you just had them the wrong way. You mean you're so close.
I mean, I don't know why I'm bringing that up because there's no points for that. I just wanted to claim that.
I'd also like to point out I had the same thing, but the two McLarens all the way around. So.
You did.
Yes, that's right.
And Liz, wait, hold on. Liz has picked one race and she's already on the board with 2 because she had Oscar and Lando right, but then she put Max on the podium as well. So I lead the way with 6. Again, I hate to brag, but totally will. Nate, you are in second with 5. Lawrence 4. Get it together because you and I have actually picked every week. And then Liz and
I've not picked every week.
All right,
so.
2. Zip it. That's because you were big timing us because you just written your book and you were too busy too. I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Yeah. So it's just the 3 of us again. I will. Lawrence, let's start with you. What do you got?
I'm gonna say because now I'm like double or quits. I'm just going to go all in. So I'm going to say Max Verstappen wins the race.
Nice.
He gets pole position. And as we talked about, it's very hard to overtake. I'm going to say Oscar Piastri takes second and Lando Norris takes third. There's a real chance that all 3 of those are wrong because say Max finishes third and the rest of it is right.
I know.
Hey, go with it.
Go with it. I like it.
Got to take some risks.
All right. Nate, what do you got?
I am going to. Since Australia, I don't think I've backed Lando to win. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to say this is the weekend he gets his head in the right place. We saw him get pole here last year. Like Lawrence just said, pole's very important. So I'll say Lando first, Oscar second, Max third.
Wait, did you guys both say Max in third?
No, I said Max to win.
That's right. You had Max to win.
Sorry, I confused you by going the old way, first through third. But
I think I'm going to keep riding this Oscar train.
Nice.
It's probably a little bit like
I don't know what I'm thinking going with Lando.
I know. I think I'm going to keep riding that.
All the facts that we have suggest not to do that.
It's like until he proves me wrong, I think I'm just going to stay on the Oscar train. So Oscar's gonna win. I think it's going to be another week in which Lando might have to do some work. But I'm going to put him second, and then I'm going to take Max in third.
Nice.
I'm not confident about any of it, but I now have some wiggle room in the championship, so I'm going to just go with it.
Interesting, we've all gone for the same 3 drivers.
Is it though?
Different orders.
Yeah. Well, Russell, I mean, because
I know it's another week where we're like, oh, Mercedes, we should be talking about them, but they're just a little bit out of reach.
Or local hero, Kimi Antonelli.
Yeah, yeah.
How about that? You know,
That would
guys
be-
pole position in
Imagine.
Miami.
Oh,
I
actually.
qualified George in Miami in the Grand Prix.
Oh, can you imagine
Oh my God, can you imagine?
how wild that would be? I would that would make me regret not going to Imola even more if Kimi got that. I'd actually probably just quit. I just feel like I'm done. I
Just
can't.
like Kimmy on the podium at all would be
Yeah,
stellar.
yeah.
Safe travels to you, Lawrence. Nate, enjoy your weekend off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching and listening. Remember, leave a comment, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the new ESPN F1 channel. We are here every week with the Unlapped podcast, but this is where you can get all of the F1 content 365 days a year. And then hit us with a 5-star review if you're catching us someplace else. And remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Guys, I'll see you next week. Safe travels. Bye.
Bye.